Good afternoon, Reclink Nation. Welcome to your Reclink speaker series in what is the 20th episode. We hope everyone's well and safe. Particularly looking forward to this conversation today with Rod Butterss. Rod is a former Reclink board member, long-time Reclink friend, former St Kilda president, and he's joined us today from his high-definition studio he's got set up there. Rod, thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, Ryan. Great to be. Thanks for the invitation. And, my involvement with Reclink goes back 20 odd years now in different capacities. And it's been just such a privilege to be involved in a small way, either involved in different events or Community Cup or Grand Final Series or sitting on the board for a while. Just a delight to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And look, it'd be remiss of me not to topicalise it and ask, how's your COVID experience been?
Yeah, really interesting. Started out just fine, making the adjustments we have to make. And then I did go through a couple of weeks of darkness. I went to the dark side. I got depressed and, I'm very fortunate that I haven't experienced a great deal of depression or sadness in my life, but I did go there for probably a couple of weeks. It was hideous, as we know. And then I don't know what happened. It's actually here. I don't mean to be plugging it, but I pulled out my favourite author, which is, there's the title, Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, The Pathway to Surrender. And I read that book and it just transformed the entire experience because, he talks about how we have thoughts and those thoughts turns into feelings. And if we don't allow those feelings permission to be, and we try and push them or repress them or, the body will break down, in various forms of disease. So I was very blessed because I'm a big fan of David Hawkins. And I just picked up the book and read it and literally 24 hours later, I was feeling a whole lot better. I should add, I rang my psychiatrist and I upped my meds. That probably helped as well.
Well, you got to use whatever tools are at hand.
You do.
I think, that sort of psychosomatic manifestation of, unease in the mind is a manifestation as disease.
Yes.
I mean, it's argued that some disease or all disease is a manifestation of, what we're going through internally in some form or another.
That's exactly right. And even if it's because we're stressed or we're lethargic or apathetic, or we might play out by eating, less quality foods, sugary foods, and that will play out as well, or smoking cigarettes or road rage, or however it plays out for those feelings to try and get out. And you're absolutely right. I think David says himself, and he's a psychiatrist and a research scientist, he says himself that, 99.9% of diseases are, as you just said, they're, as a result, they're psychosomatic, everything from headaches to stresses and anxieties and anger and, it's amazing stuff. And there's freedom available to all of us. And it's not rocket science. It's pretty simple stuff. So I'm very blessed that in my recovery journey, because I got into recovery, a decade ago after trashing my life with excesses, I got to the jumping off point and found recovery and found a whole new community of people that understood what was going on. And they showed me a pathway to find peace and joy and happiness. And that's not without its challenges, but then, you keep expanding and you keep going and you keep growing, because if you're not growing, you're dying. And you come across gems like Dr. David Hawkins, who just gently, nurses you through a process of discovery and practical tools for relief. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, and we've discussed a lot. We do a daily reflection with, Brian Millett and Michael Walsh and, other Reclink contributors. And a big part of that we've sort of unearthed along the journey is just the naming of what you're going through, you know,
Yeah,
whether that be to yourself, to a higher power, to a journal, to a friend, and
yeah,
just that sort of unburdening, you know, and just sort of, you know, name it and tame it and get rid of the shame.
absolutely. And I think men in particular, for some reason, we don't seem to be as gifted or as capable of accepting that vulnerability, you know, that it's quite safe to not feel great or to feel anxious or to feel fearful or to feel, you know, we tend to push it away. I'm sure it's got something to do with our origins and being cavemen and having bigger things to worry about than how we're feeling, like a saber-toothed tiger coming at us. But, you know, there aren't too many saber-toothed tigers out there that I've
Yeah.
seen, admittedly. So just on as a little aside, I recently joined the board of an organisation called the Male Hug, and we've got a program starting well, it starts this month actually, called Talktober, and
Right.
it's all about encouraging men to just talk and
Yeah.
to share how they're feeling, you know. Um, and I know it wasn't that long ago, and even recently, you know, if a man did that, he'd be called a sissy, or he'd be called weak, or he'd be called something. And, you know, my experience is when we carry around shame or fear or guilt or whatever, it's like 10 ton of weight on our back. And, you know, it's any wonder we can't function, not anywhere near our optimum. And so, you know, if you're prepared to be curious and start looking, start exploring, as they say, Ron, and I know you know this, that, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the other element too of, you know, embracing the feminine, and to, you know, to be a complete man, we need to acknowledge that there's a feminine component
Yes,
to us, and part of the feminine is the acceptance of wonder and not having to have a solution for everything. You know, that's a very male thing that, you know, we like to categorize and we like to have a, you know, solution in mind, and it's very fixed and compartmentalized. But sometimes, well, life is a mystery, and
yes,
it's a feminine quality to sit in that mystery and that wonder, and not necessarily to put a construct around it that just suits our, you know, our sort of cultural upbringing, and just to sit in the wonder that I don't know, or I don't have the answer, or I am feeling this. And
yes.
that's a bit of a revelation, isn't it? There's a freedom in that as well, isn't there?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the modern world is quite complex in the sense that the number of choices that we have that are presented to us in a myriad of forms, choices around where we should live and what we should eat and how we should dress and who we should
Hmm.
associate with and what we should listen to and watch and buy and this and this. You know, every tram I see has an ad on it, and every Facebook message has a, you know, and society has this expectation that to be a man, you've got to have a certain job, a certain address, a certain title, a certain partner, a certain income, a certain. So, you know, it was only a few hundred years ago that, or even way less, that a lot of these, we didn't have to make these choices.
Hmm.
We lived in a little village and we were surrounded by our community and our family, and we supported one another. And you know, we hunted and we gathered and we enjoyed the sun, and life was pretty simple. Life's become complicated, and I've often said that, you know, in my experience, most people um, spend more time maintaining their mobile phone than they do maintaining their mind. And the mind is extraordinarily powerful, um, both in terms of creativity and engineering and you know, wonderment. The mind can be extraordinarily powerful, but it equally can be extraordinarily destructive if we don't maintain it, you know, and find a lifestyle that helps us maintain that thing. I often say that the mind is like a box of matches. You know, with a box of matches, you can warm your house, you can cook your food, you can clean your teeth, you can light a cigarette, all positive maybe. But at the same time, you can burn your house down with it. And that's the sort of the yin and the yang, the breadth of
Well,
difference.
Well, that's really interesting analogy, because I heard someone recently talk about the discovery or the exploitation of the internet, just like when fire came along. I'm sure when fire was first discovered, villages burnt down by accident and people got badly burnt. And the
Yes.
internet's the same thing in a way. We really don't know the full potential of it. I mean, no inventor has ever known the full potential of their invention either. And it's almost like a bandwidth issue, like we've got the neural pathways of primates, but we're dealing with the bad news and the aspirational stuff of 7 billion people. So there's always going to be bad news coming in. And as you say, you got that phone there. I mean, it may as well be embedded in our body.
Yeah.
And it's a bandwidth thing. I can't deal with the bad news of 7 billion people in a pandemic, nor
No,
can I deal with 7 billion people putting up Instagram lives of,
that's right.
glamour and excitement. And, here I am, I'm at home, I've got my kids and it's great, but it's not parties, like,
Yeah.
so on one hand, you got all this great stuff and you got all this terrible stuff. And I'm basically a chimp with, 21st century technology. And
Yeah.
there's a disconnect there, isn't there?
Oh, that's right. I'm really interested in how the Eastern philosophies view some of these issues. And, I was sort of keen to go along and just listen to some Buddhist teachings over the last number of years. And one of the takeouts I got is that the Buddhists talk about balance. And, everything, as long as everything remains in some order of balance. But if we get to the point where we're out of balance, so the internet is great in balance, going to a party is great in balance, having a discussion in balance, everything's in balance. And in the West, we talk about addiction. In the East, they talk about attachment.
Yeah.
And many of these attachments can be major attachments like alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, etc., like that, shopping. Or they can be subtle attachments like the internet, like Facebook, like gossip. But equally, these attachments can bind us, and restrict us from growing and restrict us from just coping with life on life's terms. I suppose it all gets back to being mindful, but to practice mindfulness is not always easy, because in the modern world, we've got so many interruptions and so many aspirations and so many comparisons that sometimes we can lose sight of the prize, I think.
And Roger, you spoke about one of the blessings, or I guess I inferred one of the blessings of recovery is not only in terms of, getting sober or sort of, if maybe getting sober or reconciling yourself to substances, as it may be, depending on what your recovery looks like.
Yes.
But the tools that you pick up in that recovery process are it's actually a technology for life,
Oh, yes.
beyond addiction or attachment, isn't it? Could you,
Oh, yes.
you want to just say a little bit about how you got into recovery?
Yeah, well, I mean, I fell into recovery. I crawled into recovery. I was beaten to a pulp. I was contemplating suicide. I was dysfunctional. I was in extraordinary emotional pain. I was beaten to the point where I just had enough of something to say, hey, I need help, hey. And I met David, a mutual friend of ours, and he had a smile and he had a energy about him and he had something I wanted.
Yeah.
But I was so beaten, battered and bruised, psychologically, physically, emotionally, in every way. I'd lost the fight, so I was teachable. I became very teachable, very, very teachable. And I had no defense anymore for my previous behaviors. And I didn't understand addiction. So, one of the first things was to come to realize that it wasn't a moral issue. My body's a bit different.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with morals, because I was a pretty moral sort of guy, but I just had this particular flaw. And so David explained these things, and that made me feel a lot better. And then he took me to a meeting and I saw the 12 steps on the wall, and I was so beaten, I put up no resistance, because there was a solution that had clearly worked for a whole bunch of other people who were sitting in the room, and they looked happy. And, I hadn't looked that happy for a long time. So I just, really simple, I wanted what they had. And I said to David, I want what these guys have got. And he said, then you need to do what they're doing. And I often reflect, I was like a little wind-up toy, you know, and it was just wind me up and point me in the right direction. And so the first 12 months of recovery, I was probably fortunate. I didn't have a full-time job at the time. And so I could devote my time to recovery, and I did the step work, as we refer to, and I gained an understanding of the disease of addiction, and I gained an understanding of the steps which presented an opportunity for me to embrace a new energy, a new power, a higher power. If you want to call it God, go for it. I don't identify with that word because it brings up childhood stuff. Yeah. But I just embraced, the magnificence of the universe and the positive energy in the universe, and I wanted a bit more of that. And I learned that the opposite of addiction is connection. And, I wanted to connect. I wanted to be part of a community. I wanted to be part of good. And a buddy of mine says God is just misspelled. It's actually spelled G-O-O-D. And I could identify. And then after getting sober, I started to realize that these were my people. I actually preferred their company. They're interesting, they're honest, they're in pursuit of a similar goal.
Self-reflective.
Yeah, and I identified, these are my tribe. These are my people. I belong here, and I was pleased about that. And so I did that, and then I suppose once you get on a journey, you start to, as you used the word just a minute ago, we start to reflect. And I could see that there were other areas of my life that needed attending to, my physical, my psychological, my childhood, my, various other things. So, because I'd had a really positive experience in the recovery fellowships, I just kept going, and surprise, surprise, it got better and better. But there are times when life, you bump into life on life's terms and you cop one, across the chops, and you get set back and sat on your backside, and, finances will do that. Relationships will do that. Life on life terms will do that. But I've now got a community that I trust. I've got some tools. I've got some daily practices, and I think I have faith, more than anything, that this is me. This is my choice. It's a preferable choice,
And Rod, for those who don't know, I mean, you were, if you look up High Flyer, you were right up there in terms of profile and lifestyle and status. But there was a bit of a public unwinding there, wasn't there, at St Kilda? What's the relationship like with St Kilda? And, tell us a little bit about how exciting that was at that time. There were obviously good times as well. I mean, St Kilda were red hot, during that time, and great players, and there's a certain excitement that the club hadn't had, and they were sort of realising potential. What was that like, and what's your relationship with the club like now?
Well, I mean, I look back upon my time at St Kilda from 2000 to 2008 with pure, unadulterated joy. We had, I was a kid in a lolly shop. I loved AFL, and I'm sitting there as president of a club that had struggled for 100 years. And I was lucky that I was able to bring in some people way smarter than me who could redesign the organisation, re-engineer the organisation, use modern techniques, to redesign it and reshape it. And, we built that list, which was extraordinary. And I got a first-hand view of human behaviour, how we all behave in surrounded by prestige and power and status and title, but also immersed in the beauty of what I still think is the best game on the planet. I just love AFL. And, I got to meet some fascinating people. I got to meet a whole bunch of very successful business people, billionaires, and, and because I'm human, I was drawn to that. And I think I became an arrogant arsehole, to be frank. And I didn't, I suppose, these days I can look back at that experience, and whilst I'm grateful, I think I can appreciate that I had the emotional intelligence of a 10-year-old. I had business acumen, and I had energy, and I had, capacity to build a team as the leader, but I had the emotional intelligence of a teenager. And so I didn't cope well with status and title. And I'd been very fortunate in business. I'd built some companies and sold them for stupid amounts of money, you know, tens of millions of dollars, even 100 million. But I was like a kid in a lolly shop. You know, I just couldn't get enough cars and drugs and alcohol and parties, and you know, I just couldn't get enough. And you know, and I can look back now and just say, well, I was a classic addict or alcoholic, and I was an emotional, you know, child, and so I had to learn the hard way. My relationship with the club now is okay. It's you know, it's funny because I still love AFL. I think when I was in the role, I dived into the middle of it and I was completely immersed, probably out of balance. I did let my family responsibilities suffer. And so when the role came to an end, and it came to an end in an unfortunate manner because I'd allowed the role to become my identity, huge mistake, massive mistake. So when that was stripped away from me, I became resentful, I became angry, I became more of an alcoholic, and more irresponsible, more childlike. So there was a grieving period of a number of years. And sometimes I don't admit this very often, and you know, the cat's out of the bag now, but sometimes they'd win and I was annoyed, you know, because that was my pride. How dare you have success without my fingerprints on it?
Yeah.
And that was my grubby little pride.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's a German word, what's the word?
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah. And there's no English equivalent of the word. So I think I had a fair dose of that.
Yeah.
I haven't admitted that too broadly because it's embarrassing. You know, it's embarrassing to admit. And if the average punter in the street, and I love our members, I used to really love our members because they're so passionate. But if they saw me in the street after admitting that, they'd want to give me a foot in the arse, I reckon. You know, because that's just a sort of selfish little kid approach. But a mate of mine's gone in as president recently, Andrew Bassett from Seek.com fame, and Andy was kind enough to reach out a couple of times, and the previous president reached out a couple of times, and we got together. You know, so my relationship's okay, but I think you've got to be careful when you're an ex-president or an ex-husband or an ex-chief executive. Get your finger out of the pie. You've had your turn, move on. You know, I think that's important. I know when I was pres, I didn't really appreciate, you know, whilst I made previous presidents and previous administrators welcome back at the club, to be perfectly blunt, I wasn't that interested in their opinion unless I asked for it. So, you know, you sort of tread a bit of a fine line. But,
and so now when you watch St Kilda play, you just wholeheartedly can take joy in what's going on, or is there still a little part that...
If I'm perfectly honest, there's still a little part.
Yeah.
And for those of us that are in recovery and understand the 12 steps, my sponsor refers me to step 4.
We spoke about step 4 recently, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
And so I'm working diligently through that. But also that book I mentioned earlier, this book, the David Hawkins book, is just gold in terms of that area, because clearly there's some association to how I'm feeling with my emotional immaturity and my inability. And I think, Ran, even just expressing that, you know, what we've just talked about in the last minute, which I've never expressed publicly, is counterintuitively super positive.
Yeah, because it's a shame. Shame will kill us, right?
There's
a shame in that. But then, I mean, we don't care. Like, we care about you, but we don't care that you feel that. Like, we've got our own stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like, and St Kilda people will feel the same. Like, it's not a bigger deal to anyone else as it is to you, and it's a massive deal to you to carry that, isn't it?
Oh, it kills you.
Yeah, I know.
It stops you from achieving your potential.
Yeah.
It's the stuff of road rage.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm fascinated with road rage. I mean, I want to do a PhD on road rage. You think about it. You're driving down the street as a perfectly normal human being. You're in your car, you're listening to the news or whatever. Someone takes 10 feet of space from you and you go like that into a raging lunatic. You want to murder them. What happened?
Well, I've heard someone give the explanation that because you're traveling at 100 k's an hour, that you've got heightened senses and there's an awareness of risk. But I would refute that, because when I was in recovery, we had this recovery house. It was right in the middle of Toorak Village, and behind Toorak Village there's that car park there, and all these elderly people in these massive Mercedes. Some of the biggest road rage incidents were in car parks where the cars are barely travelling.
That's right.
Everyone's wealthy, they're all well off. There'd be punch-ons amongst people in fur coats, and
Yeah.
like what's going on there?
Well, I don't think it's the heightened, I really don't believe it's the heightened awareness because
No.
you're doing 100 kilometres an hour, because if that worries you, then you'll provide more space between you and the next car. You'll just make a smart decision. It's more that that there's a trigger that gets flicked that brings out the worst in you because someone's taken something off you or someone's imposed themselves in such a subtle way, because you're actually going to get to work 0.3 of a second later. That's the reality of what just occurred. And the opposite of that is, and we've all experienced it, when we're driving along the road and we see someone trying to get in and we back off a little bit and wave them in, we get a sense of joy or a sense of, it's, the opposite of road rage, a sense of giving. So, look, I just think that, and we've all, I have to admit, I've road raged, not for a long time, but I've done it. I think it's a fascinating representation of where a person is at, because I have a lot of friends who tell me they don't particularly like their partner, they don't particularly like their job, they don't particularly like their neighbour, they don't particularly like much at all. But why get stuck in that? It's a suffocating place to be.
Yeah, well, it came up this morning in Brian Millett was talking about, generosity, and generosity can just come in small doses that unrecognised, and that can be just letting someone in.
Yes.
But the benefit is to yourself, is to that little feel good.
Yeah, it's like that little trick about, 2 or 3 acts of kindness a day, but don't tell anyone.
Yeah. Just talking about fast cars and, squandering fortunes. I was just thinking of the George Best quote.
Oh, yeah.
When he went bankrupt, they said, well, what did you spend all your money on? He said, well, 95% of it I spent on fast women, fast cars and drugs. And the other 5% I just wasted.
Yeah. I thoroughly identify with George's comment. The other amusing,
the addict in you would say, well, I could have had that other 5% for all those things. That's how your mind thinks.
The other amusing thing is, I remember the first time I watched that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio about the Wall Street. What's it called?
Wolf of Wall Street.
The Wolf of Wall Street. I was in the fetal position under the chair in the theatre. It was like a biography. It was just my life playing out. The only thing I never did was to throw a dwarf, but otherwise it was pretty accurate. And I felt a massive amount of shame.
And it was a different culture there, the 80s, before fringe benefits tax kicked in, and long lunches and, different attitudes around, alcohol and respect for women and, workplace etiquette and practices and just the way, it was a very different culture then, wasn't it? I mean, it's sort of easy to judge ourselves harshly looking back in retrospect, but that was what was going on, wasn't it? And if you were inclined to, have an addictive tendency, then, well, it was all happening, wasn't it?
And I think it was, society has a great capacity to normalise, and we normalise things, and back then we normalised that behaviour. Yep. I'm a young, successful businessman, therefore I go to lunch, I get drunk, I go to the strip clubs, I go to the casino, I take drugs, I get home late, I'm a lousy father, but I'm a great provider. We normalise it. And because I had that emotional immaturity, I could justify it as well, which is just as bad. And it took me to age 50 to finally have the penny drop and try and take some response. Once somebody pointed out the cycle of addiction, the biological, medical nature of addiction, then all of a sudden, like you, Ron, I had a responsibility. You know, I had to grow up and take responsibility. But I'm fascinated how we can normalize, rationalize, justify shitty behavior. And yes, it was culturally more accepted back then. But if you don't grow, you die. So, but also the other challenge now, of course, is when we have these conversations in 2020, and we talk about some of our behaviours. Of course, the keyboard warriors want to try and destroy us. You know, there's a couple of examples in the media recently. I think the Richmond Footy Club were having singing their song, and one of the players did something that we, in 2020, we would say is less than appropriate by way of touching another player. And the keyboard warriors went berserk, you know, rather than sort of see it from the perspective that it's actually a privilege to be invited into their home. And, you know, without having to judge so much what is boyish behaviour. And the thing that struck me about that, if you remember the incident, is that the Tigers are a very sophisticated, very mature, very responsible organisation. So under Peggy O'Neill, and Butch Gale. So if a player had a problem with certain elements of behaviour, which quite frankly, to anyone that's been in a footy club room, just ritualistic, then there are a myriad of platforms and channels to actually express that, you know, and not be judged and just express it. So it's a challenge for us all, I think, in 2020, where we're subject to social media, we're subject to visibility, we're much more visible. And so we let people see in, and yet there's this element that want to criticise. I think it's only the more noisy minority. And one of the things that David Hawkins talks about is neutrality, the joy of neutrality. I don't necessarily have to have an opinion.
Yeah.
You know, so rather than get on the keyboard and be quite hurtful and nasty and bully and shame, maybe we could pause and just say, look, you know, that what happens in that footy club room is foreign to me. I'm a visitor, I'm a guest, so I don't have to have an opinion. Just, you know, I think they're pretty good people, they'll sort it out, rather than go bash. You know?
Yeah, but you know, and yet you see people being pushed to have an opinion and take a stance on things, as if not having an opinion or taking a stance is part of the problem or the perceived problem. So there's a push to sort of declare your allegiances. And, you know, I'm talking about public figures. It's not so much the same for someone like myself, you know, who doesn't have that platform. But you see it, that they're really being pushed to, you know, jump on the side of whatever the cause du jour is, you know. And so, you know, and you know, if your career, you know, and there's people losing their livelihoods over, you know, 140 character statements that they put out, you know, or their spouse puts out.
That's right. And things needed to change. There's no question, you know, our attitude toward First Australians, our attitude towards women, our attitude towards many things needed to come under the microscope and go through a period of change. And I think we all accept that. But I don't know that when we shame people, that it's a terribly effective, in fact, it's a very ineffective method of bringing people along. You're not going to be able to participate to the conversation or even admit you were wrong if you're being shamed out.
Yeah, or shouted down.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk, you know, but if the conversation and dialogue can't take place, there's no moving forward. I mean, has anyone ever been convinced in a sort of rage-filled Twitter rant of the other person's opinion?
No, of course not.
Like, never. You just dig your heels in.
You dig your heels in and you create a divide.
Yeah.
So you create, you know, them and us, and you're no good, and you should think like me. And And it's all the stuff Hawkins talks about, that if we can just learn to pause.
Yep.
And do I have to have an opinion on this? I'm sure you're familiar with that beautiful little catch cry in the fellowship. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now?
Yep.
And I think if that was applied across the Twitter platform, Twitter would be out of business.
And anger and outrage have their place, but is it the right place at the right time and expressed in the right way?
That's right. That's right. And I got off Twitter eventually because I just found it, I didn't
Toxic.
post much, but I just saw the bile being exchanged. And I just didn't do it for me.
Something else that's come up, we've spoken to a lot of former footballers and, people in high places of sports administration, and you touched on it, is, identity and tying in who we are to our job. And, like I know when my family, we decided to buy a caravan, we're going to go around Australia, and all these caravans were for sale by widows, and they've worked all their life, and then they'd retired, and then the husband had dropped dead within a year. And so all these caravans for sale was like the same story repeated again and again because of the loss of identity, and it's affected my family in that way. So how do you see your peer group that you came up with? How do you see them dealing with the change in their identity, either status or, former footballers? How do you see that playing out, and how's the conversation around men's health in your circles?
Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go. I really do. We're starting to talk about it. The male hugger's starting to talk about it, and we're talking about it now. But I think we've got a long way to go. Someone said to me recently, they wrote a little article and said, they were referring to a person who started their new job and they were over the moon with their new job and over the moon with their new title and over the moon. And 3 years later, they hated it. What happened? What happened? You've gone from loving something to hating something. And, there's another little phrase I refer to from time to time, that familiarity can breed contempt. And so we've got to keep growing. We've got to keep checking ourselves. I met a lot of ex-footballers, and it saddens me that, and it might be a noisy minority rather than the majority, but it just saddens me that there's not too many footballers I meet who have played AFL who are grateful and have gratitude toward that unique opportunity. It seems to me that, and again, it might be the noisy minority, but it seems to me that, these guys are fortunate to play AFL, but if they won one club award or one All-Australian, it should have been 3. And if they won one premiership, it should have been 5. And so because they're very young men when they come in, and they're full of wild expectation and dreams, and, and most of them leave with a degree of less than satisfied, they haven't achieved. And then somebody sticks a microphone in their hand and they're a bloody expert on everything. And, I think the clubs have got a lot more work to do to help these young kids, at 17 and 18, come into this system where they're going to be adored, they're going to be paid a lot of money, they're going to be exposed to all sorts of unique challenges. And, I hope that COVID teaches us that we've just got to get better. It really disturbs me, Ram, that on planet Earth today, we have more than enough science, more than enough technology, and more than enough capital to have stopped COVID in its tracks before it even affected one person. But sadly, what's missing? A little thing called goodwill. That's the only thing that's missing. And I mean, I was always hard right in politically speaking, but now I'm sort of, moving in a different direction, because I just think the lack of equity across the distribution of wealth means that people are starving, people are hungry, people are uneducated. People are getting diseases, and it's unnecessary, you know. And I don't know what the right number is, you know. Is it $1 billion or $5 billion? But beyond that, how many cars in the garage do you need whilst your fellow man is starving and families are hungry and disease ridden? Just
Well,
you
I
know,
think for all of us, we realizing that it's no good to be the rich man on the hill now, living in isolation, because I mean, how could you, sort of reconcile yourself to some sort of material happiness when everyone around you is either, is suffering, basically? I mean, it just wouldn't do. And I think I've sort of had a shift in my view of politicians, because they must have had a realization that there's no way they can look out for their own, self-interest without looking out for the well-being of everyone else.
yeah, I think they go
in this current situation.
I think they go in very idealistic and very positive desire to make the world a better place. But the former New South Wales Premier Neville Wran, you probably don't remember him.
I know. Yeah.
Wran, you're a bit young. But Neville Wran said he entered politics bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and full of aspirations to change the world. But by the time he got into a position of power, he'd done so many deals and he had so many people favours that he had one arm tied behind his back. You know, I really hope that, you know, I worked out recently, I won't name the billionaire, but we've got one billionaire who I've got to know quite well over the years. And his wealth is the equivalent of having 60,000 motor cars in your garage. I mean, to put it into some sort of perspective, what are you going to do with 60,000 motor cars in your garage? You know, and whilst people are hungry, people are starving, people need education, people need... So anyway, I just hope that, it seems to me that we're talking about these things a bit more these days. And, you know, hopefully the psyche will start to shift a bit more. But I mean, when you've got organisations like the Catholic Church, and I don't want to get too religious because I'm not a religious person, but if you read the Bible, Jesus' message was pretty neat, pretty solid. You know, hard to argue. But if you look at the organisation today, they've gone and built $1 trillion worth of wealth. That's not what he said. And I don't get it. Well, I do get it. It's called the 7 deadly sins.
Well, we could, I just heard something recently, and it's very simple. And I think we could distill it down, you know, of all religion. The Dalai Lama said we can all be kinder.
Yes. Yes.
How simple is that?
Oh,
we could all improve. There's, you know, none of us are so enlightened that we can't improve the relationships with our family.
Yes.
Or those around us.
Yes.
So anyway, we got quite deep and philosophical there. I think I might need to have a lay down in a minute.
Sorry, mate.
No, not at all. Not at all. I just wanted to just bring it back. So what does your days look like at the moment? You know, like we've been talking about routine with our daily reflections. You know, it's just as a way to check in and go through our troubleshooting list of, you know, am I this, you know, hungry, angry, lonely, yes, tired, you know, and just building up a routine, you know, around physical health, diet, sleep. What does your day look like at the moment, Rod?
It's a mixture of positive and less than positive. I get up and have a fag.
Yeah.
And
at least you can, right?
Yeah, I can, and a coffee. But then I'm very blessed. I have a dear friend who's a meditation master. He's an Indian fellow, and he's come through the Art of Living Foundation. So he at about 7 o'clock every morning, he takes me through a 45-minute guided meditation, which is just beautiful. And then I'll go for a walk, if particularly weather permitting, go for a walk. Then I'll get stuck into work for, you know, a few hours and do a few businessy things, and then just relax at the end of the day. And, you know, for those that
online meetings, you doing online meetings? Online meetings? Yeah.
I don't do enough, Ran. I should do more. I find the online meetings.
Well, we're doing one now.
Yeah. Oh, this type of meeting. I thought you were talking fellowship meeting. Sorry.
No, I was. This is a fellowship meeting, Rod.
Well, it is, yes.
When one or more gather.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, coffee pot and a resentment. Yeah. So I do my recovery stuff. I've got some dear buddies who are also on the journey with me, and we talk. And then I probably lay on the couch and play with the pets. I've got a lovely little cat who's a kitten, and she's great. And then twice a week we do a Zoom meditation, which is guided by the buddy of mine, the Indian fellow, and they're free, open to everybody. If anyone's interested in a beautiful 20-minute guided meditation on a Monday or a Wednesday night, just let me know and we'll put you on the email list. And it's a Zoom meditation, so we do that twice a week. Yeah, keep it pretty simple, Ran. Don't try and overcomplicate things.
So you're not getting helicoptered into, lavish weddings in Sydney Harbour anymore, or not as frequently?
No, not at all. That's the thing.
Now, Rod, I've got a good friend of ours with us, and I know he'll be dying to say g'day and ask a question. Let me just unmute him, so we're good to go. And that is
Peter Cullen.
Peter Cullen. Peter, how you doing?
Oh, good, thank you, Ron. And it's great to have Rod on. It's such an interesting discussion too about life and the heart of living. And for people listening, that must bring so much. So I thank you for that. We had a bit of a chat last night, and I just find the whole area so interesting. But you spoke about belonging at one stage, having somewhere to belong in the tribe and so forth. And I guess I thought of Reclink a little bit within that context. But what's your take on the importance of belonging for one's health?
Oh, it's vital, Peter. It's absolutely vital. The opposite of addiction is connection. And when we're connected or we're belonging to our tribe, whether it's a golf tribe or my Reclink tribe or my AA tribe or my footy team tribe or my community tribe, these things are vital. They're vital to humankind, that we belong, we are part of, we are engaged. Because if you think of the opposites, we're disengaged, we're isolating, we're being stimulated by external influences that are less than helpful. And if you're an addict like me, you'll overcook it and destroy yourself. So, I often say to young people coming into recovery, why don't you make a list of everything you've ever wanted to do, but you've been too busy drinking and drugging to do it? So it might be learn an instrument or write poetry or join a local acting class or learn a language. It doesn't matter. But most of those things involved engaging with others, and by it also stimulates that childlike desire that we all have to have some fun. We've all got lists of things that I really wish I had to learn piano. I really wish I had to learn a language. I really wish I had to have done this. Well, go and do it, because you've now got time. And you meet your people. It's pretty important, very important. And Reclink's been, a bit of like a glue that's enabled people to come together, particularly the disadvantaged and the guys in the community that have been pushed aside. Reclink's been like amazing to give them a place to belong, an association. Vital.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rod. It's interesting, I find, and I'm picking up the threads of it. I think that very often somebody who's been a billionaire at some stage and been in maybe a president of a footy club, and they lose those things. But I see through that you very often, and you're not the only one, but I've heard many people say that they had those things, but in a way I'm happier now because I'm a better person. Would you say that?
Absolutely. If I'm going to measure my happiness by the size of my wallet, my address, my status, my title, my partner, my standing in the community, I'm heading at 180 kilometres an hour toward a brick wall. Because everything on this planet comes to an end. Everything. chapters close. So if we're out of balance in terms of our desire for status and title and et cetera, we're gonna be hurt. We're gonna end up wounded. And we know that happiness and joy does not come from material things. Yeah, they're fun to have, but happiness and joy, they say, Pete, that the longest journey you'll ever take in your life is the journey from there to there. And it takes a lifetime. And, you know, if we can be more heartfelt then and learn to do that, then I know from first-hand experience, you know, I had 20 cars in the garage. I won't tell you how many mistresses I had because it's a family show, you know, but I was a bloody stinker and I wasn't happy. I'd climbed the mountain. I stood on top of Mount Everest and I was miserable. I was destroying myself. So yes, you know, material things are nice, but if you think they're the answer, I can tell you, you're in for a rude surprise.
But even in those days, and you described yourself as always being a moral person, I remember contacting you and you always came out, you were actually very generous. You came out to nearly everything and trophy presentations and grand finals and, you know, we came out to the club and all sorts of things. So even in those days, what was it like looking at Reclink and being part of an elite sport? I remember you giving me the chance to have a meeting with the CEO, and to me that was a wonderful experience at that time. And I just wondered how you sort of compelled, and when you see the two worlds at that time, what did it look like when you came down to Reclink after being where you were at from those eyes going back?
Yeah, look, I think that, you know, there's a little bit of good in all of us and a little bit of bad. What's that saying? You know, a little bit of, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I was probably just conscious enough, even though I was out of control, I was conscious enough to recognize the energy and the positivity and the wonderful contribution that Reclink were making. I could see it, I could identify with it, and you know, I wasn't working in those days, so I had plenty of spare time. And you know, the other, there's a practical element of this too, Peter, and that is, I don't know whether anyone's told you this, but you're a very difficult person to say no to.
Yeah, okay, you see.
that was a compliment, Peter.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That's all right. No, that's fine. Yeah, that's.
Unfortunately, sometimes we do have to say no, Pete.
Oh, well, no, you were pretty good, Rod. You didn't say no very often. You made some pretty good talks in those times as well. If I just ask one, and it might be too big to ask, but I know that you had an aspiration or a vision maybe at some point in your life to create a new country.
Yes.
And I know that's a very big conversation for anyone, for the many people listening to hear, and you couldn't deal with it in this time, but I don't know if you'd like to say maybe a few words about that. If you could
I can keep it pretty brief. Peter, there are 70 million refugees on the planet. They're stateless, they're homeless, they're traumatized. No one wants them. They're in prison-style environments. I think there's enough vacant land and islands on the planet that if we got together and built some simple infrastructure to begin with and no one wants these people anyway, and made it available to them. They're pretty well-educated people on the whole, you know, or often enough. They wouldn't need much to build themselves, you know, very effective functioning communities, and we can call it a new country. I think it's really doable, and I know I've shared it with a whole bunch of, you know, guys in education and business, and everyone agrees it's doable. So I've got a few things on my plate at the moment building the business, but I just want to see if we can do it, because
yeah.
We can put a man on the moon. We can build a Great Wall of China. We can do a lot of great things. I think we can do it.
Yeah,
sounds like a good one for part 2, Rod.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've shot my gob off, so I have to do it now.
No, that's what we asked you on for, Rod. I'm mindful that you did set aside time in your day, and you've got another appointment to go on with. So we'll wrap it up. Rod Butterss, absolute pleasure to talk to you. Let's do it again. And yeah, thanks for being part of the Reclink Speaker Series.
Ron, thanks for inviting me. I love Reclink and I love the work you do, and I really appreciate it. I'm touched. Thank you.